for that great introduction. And I'm going to share my screen because I have a presentation for you as well. So here we go. So the title for my presentation is Soils and Climate Change, Digging Deeper. There we go. So thanks for introducing my organization, Inter Pares, an organization I've been working with since 2005, and that I've had the pleasure of getting to know a lot of important activists around the world that are working to promote agroecology and food sovereignty. And thanks for the excellent presentations that we've heard so far that had us travel across Africa. And I'm going to get us to travel on another continent. We're going to travel to Asia, and I want to share a story about some incredible work that we're also supporting in India. So what we've heard so far in terms of the presentations is how important it is to have healthy soils, the important role it plays in terms of biodiversity, food production, and we've also heard of the role that healthy soils can play in sequestering carbon. And maintaining healthy soils is a step in the right direction, but only if we keep walking. So here's a short story of what I mean. So let's travel for a moment to Telangana, India, where we've been working with the Deccan Development Society, or DDS, for over 20 years now. And so this is a region that suffered tremendously from hunger and from droughts. And in this region, DDS works with some of the most marginalized populations in the area, particularly Dalit women. And Dalit means the untouchable, so it's a caste in the Indian caste system. And so a population that's quite vulnerable, suffers from illiteracy, and that's been quite marginalized. And by working at the village level and organizing the women into sangams, or community-based women's organizations, these women have been able to exert more power and influence, and they've been able to gain access to land. Unfortunately, the land that was given to them was land that was quite poor quality because of Green Revolution agriculture that was carried out over decades on the land. But through the application of a lot of manure and through the planting of trees and nitrogen fixing plants such as legumes and leafy plants to build up carbon, they've actually increased and transformed the soil. So it is much healthier now, and it's producing quite a lot of varied food. And as we'll see on the next slide, they've also built up their seed diversity. So this was extremely important. They've realized that for a community to be autonomous, you need to build your own seed sovereignty. So you don't depend on foreign seeds and you don't depend on inputs as well. So they've built a big diversity of seeds and have applied a lot of agroecological techniques. And this region now that used to suffer from hunger, and that was very fragile to droughts, is actually quite a very strong food producing region with, and it is quite resilient to climate change. So some of the important work that we've done over there as well was to facilitate farmers' exchange between West Africa, where there's similar environments in terms of, if we're thinking of the Sahel countries, arid conditions, and where certain foods are also very important to the local diet, such as millets and sorghums. And so here you've got a photo of a type of millet that was thought to have gone extinct in West Africa, but this farmer here, his name is Georges Tinet, actually rediscovered some seeds and planted them and started multiplying them. And they've become very important for the local diet in parts of Senegal. And these seeds were also shared with DDS. And so the fields you see in the back are the beautiful millets that's growing there. So not only are farmer-to-farmer exchanges important in terms of sharing information, knowledge, experience, but it also builds important solidarity for the struggles to maintain family farms and biodiversity going. So if we're to continue to walk in the right direction, so yes, we need to make sure that the soils are healthy, but one of the first things for that is to stop harming them in the first place. The soil, as Paul so eloquently explained, is composed of a whole bunch of microorganisms, that living biological beings that are extremely important. And unfortunately, when you expose soils to chemical fertilizers and pesticides, that affects the soil composition, the chemistry, but also the life that's contained in the soil. And so life will virtually disappear from the soil. And so we need to sustain life so that life can build soil and soil can keep nourishing us. So one of my personal heroes is, of course, the earthworm. We also need to transition away from high input agriculture to agroecology. While soils can sequester carbon, it cannot sufficiently offset the greenhouse gas emissions that are released from manufacturing and the use of chemical inputs that are used in conventional agriculture. As the National Farmers Union reminds us in their excellent report, Tackling the Farm and Climate Crisis, agriculture is not driving climate change. It's high input industrial agriculture that's driving climate change. So, for example, in Canada, the agricultural sector contributes 12% of greenhouse gas emissions, and this rate is steadily increasing. And 1/3 of those emissions actually come from the use of nitrogen-based fertilizers. So we need to transition away from high input agriculture if we're to make a real dent in reducing emissions. And healthy soils have to play a role, but it's not sufficient. We also need to embrace low input forms of agriculture, such as agroecology. So another thing we absolutely have to do is we have to remove the barriers that are preventing the uptake of agroecology. There's multiple studies that lay out catastrophic scenarios if we continue growing food the way we're doing. To name just a few, the IASTD, or the more recent International Panel on Climate Change land report. The overwhelming body of evidence out there explicitly states that we've reached planetary limits and we need to rapidly move away from industrial agriculture towards more sustainable food systems. So why isn't this happening? Well, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, or IPES, mentions a series of lock-ins that are preventing the uptake of agroecology by policymakers. And so on the graph that you've got here in front of you, you can see some of these lock-ins, such as short-term thinking, compartmentalized thinking, focusing everything on exports instead of local food systems. But if you look at the graph, at the center of that is the concentration of power, where large corporations invested in high input agriculture have very deep pockets and a lot of influence. So if we're serious about tackling climate change and biodiversity loss and growing inequality, we need to address the root causes of what we're dealing with here. We need policies and incentives that reward farming that's ecological. And we also need to tackle the power imbalance that exists and break up the monopolies that seem to dictate government policymaking. I guess what I'm saying is that in addition to agroecology, we need food sovereignty. Thank you.